Okay, can we start? Not yet. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alexandra Krukova. I'm from the group 406, and I'm here to give you a brief overview of my term paper Synopsis dedicated to the following topic: gravity theory, the impact of languages on bilateral trade. My presentation consists of three parts. Firstly, I will give you a brief outline of the general purpose and the subject of my research, as well as its specific tasks. Then I will proceed to justify the novelty of my research and to explain the applied model. And finally, I will conclude by going over the main findings of my research. Your questions are welcome at the end of my presentation, and I really hope that I will take up only about 7 minutes of your time. So let me start by identifying the subject of my research, which is the bilateral trade in the context of gravity theory. There is no exaggeration in saying that the international trade is the driving force behind the world economic growth, and there is a great variety of both economic and non-economic incentives that determines the choice of trading partners and affects the volume of bilateral trade flows. So it is very important to study the unconventional factors that influence the volume of international trade. Thus, the general purpose of my research was to apply the gravity model in order to examine the impact of languages on bilateral trade between two countries. In particular, the specific tasks were to consider the basic gravity model, to implement new variables which take into consideration the impact of languages, and finally to analyze what impact the languages might have on the volume of bilateral trade. Therefore, the thesis of my research paper is that the two countries share common language among their national languages or have kindred languages. They are likely to trade more compared to a pair of countries with languages of which have nothing in common. The novelty of my research lies in the applied model. The gravity theory is quite rarely used in Russian economic studies, despite the fact that it is very popular in Western economic schools. Moreover, languages have rarely been a subject of a separate research, usually being just a minor factor in the model. So let me proceed to explain what the gravity model is. In fact, I've been always fascinated by physics, but I have never been any good at it, so I was just excited to find something that I could understand and which was still somehow related to physics. So according to Newton's universal law of gravitation, the force two objects exert on each other is a function of their masses divided by the square of the distance between them. The slide shows the most common economic application of the gravity theory, where the trade flow between two countries, or X, is a function of the economic masses of these countries, usually represented by their gross domestic products, divided by the square of the economic distance between these countries. The economic distance includes not only the physical distance as a proxy for transportational costs, but also all other impediments to trade, such as trade policies, national borders, regulatory bottlenecks, and so on. Usually the equation is transformed into a log linear regression, addressing the problems of using different measurements, billions of dollars and square kilometers. So, and I have also implemented several language variables which take into account whether the countries share the same language or their languages belong to the same group, and the number of English-speaking people in these countries as a possible alternative solution of using English as a third but still common language for both trading partners. After running the regression on data on 17 countries, the following results were observed. Firstly, when the GDP of the donor country or the exporter expands by as much as 1%, the trade flow responds by 0.93% growth. Likewise, when the GDP of the recipient country or the importer increases by 1%, the volume of trade flow between them edges up by 0.86%. However, the increase in economic distance leads to a sharp 1.2% plunge in the volume of trade between these countries. Increase in economic distance doesn't mean changing in physical distance, although it is also possible, but rather some changes in shipping costs, tariffs, and so on. In addition to that, the languages proved to have influence on the volume of trade. If the countries have the same language or have kindred languages, they are likely to trade more, with sharing a common language exerting slightly greater influence on the volume of trade than having the languages which just belong to the same branch of a bigger language family. The number of English speakers in the country, on the other hand, proved to have no significant influence on the volume of international trade. Nevertheless, it is just a statistical model which is true to life only to some extent, so this topic is definitely worth further research. This brings us to the last point of my presentation, so let me conclude by going over the main findings of my work. First of all, the gravity model implies that the GDPs of the trading partners have a distinct positive influence on the volume of trade, whereas the economic distance has negative influence. As far as the languages are concerned, if the countries share a common language among their primary or secondary national languages, they are likely to trade more. The same effect occurs when their languages belong to the same subdivision of one language family. All things considered, languages prove to be quite an important determinant of the international trade, so when the countries share one common language or their languages are closely related, they are likely to trade more than a pair of countries, languages of which have nothing in common. Actually, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Your questions are welcome now.